So I'm carrying on with the demo. So I started this one last week, and last week I demonstrated gridding images up. So that was the basic idea. So what I did was I got one of these photos, got rid of the border, and then folded it in four to make a grid. Four that way, and then put the lines on. And then on the board, I basically just got some strips of paper, width and height, cut to length, fold them in four, and that gave me the grid. And then if I wanted more, I could have then folded it again and done that. So that was that. So the next stage is some underpainting. So the theme for this month is seascapes, and I'll keep it one more week, even though we're going into September next week. I'll do one more week on this, otherwise it's a very short project. So I'm basing this one on my kind of plan air studies of Anglesey. So this little bit here was this bit down here, and I think we were tucked behind there, sort of trying to paint in the wind. We did those ones. But this was a view from slightly higher up, we basically where the car park was. It gave us, and I quite like the fact that there's a bit more sea in these views. It's just I couldn't actually paint there at the time. So this was an underpainted one from the demos in Rayleigh. Some of these photos I've tweaked them a little bit on the computer and enhanced the colours. So some of them are a little bit brighter. But actually I think with this one I want to go back to that kind of grey feel, because it was a very grey day. I don't want to completely lose that. So I could have two versions, perhaps a brighter one and a grey one. So I started to mix some greys. I'm just going to use, they're already drying up, it's acrylics and it's drying quite quickly. Just a tiniest bit of water. And really, it doesn't need to be particularly, I'm thinking underpainting, then I'll do another coat over the top if needs be. So actually that's not too different from the colour of the board really. So I'll keep that fairly random and just try and get rid of some of the... It's a good idea if you've used a grid to get rid of most of the grid before you put the paint on. Otherwise I find that the lines will start to show through. I think to me there's just a very subtle difference between the colour there and there. To me it feels slightly warmer, slightly more yellowy as I get further down. So I've got another mix here where I've used the white and just a tiny little bit of yellow ochre just to warm that up. That's slightly lighter too, and I think that's got a good chance of. And again, it's underpainting, so just going in with a fairly big brush. And this is acrylics I'm using, but I may well use when I come to do the kind of refined colour, I'll probably use the water mixable oils for that. But either would work fine. That's kind of coming down to about here. I'll do that a bit another time. So that would be a little bit of underpainted sky, and then what I've done here is I've dropped that line down a little bit so that it doesn't completely run into from one bit of rock to the other, just to kind of distinguish. So I've made a few changes there, a little bit of artistic license. Again, this is quite grey in the background, so if we're going back in space, the colours and the tones will be more blue in the colours. So I'm making another grey using some blue and the colour I had before, and a little bit of crimson. I don't want it too dark. I'm actually going to make that a tiny bit lighter. But I'm not too worried, because I can, with the final coat, just lighten it a little bit still. I'm inclined with acrylics and oils to go too dark and then lighten up afterwards. So it's the exact opposite watercolour. I've actually extended this out a little bit as well. Again, don't feel you've got to absolutely keep rigidly to the scene that's in your photographs. And as long as it looks like a convincing scene, and you're creating some interesting, almost like abstract shapes, and it's important to keep an interesting look to it. So far I managed to do that with that brush. Probably would need a slightly smaller brush really to get down there. Perhaps work a little bit here and then work through the sea. In fact, I think the sea would be better first. So again, it's another grey. I think I'll add a tiny bit of cerulean to the grey I've got, and some, just to give it a different characteristic. Lighten it up a little bit, because that's reading lighter. The thing with the acrylics is they probably will dry a little bit darker anyway, and you get what's called a colour shift with acrylics. They dry darker than they are light. So that would, yeah, I think that would work okay.
What colours did you use for your waterfall?
Whatever was there, plus a bit of cerulean. I'm actually going to put a tiny bit more crimson in it as well.
You put crimson in it?
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of everything. There's probably like a little bit of raw umber, so something like that. Raw umber and ultramarine give, I think, are a nice quick way of making a grey.
Okay.
So that's a good start. So that's got me to something like that. And then that's a bit too dark, so I'll lighten it with some white. So that, yeah, something like that. Okay, that's, we can work that in. And then actually a tiny bit of cerulean just to make it a slightly greeny, a little bit more of a greeny grey. So I don't too much of that. Pitch a tiny bit up, but most of it down the palette, so that what I mix in will just very subtly change it. And that can be, yeah, quite like that sort of look. I'll leave a little bit of space there. That's where the waves can go in the distance. That can kind of come to there. I think it's going to be a bit dark actually, that, particularly when it dries. And then add a little bit more, just lighten it a tiny bit here. And actually all this foam, I might just put that on the final, you know, with the oils or the final layer. So I could perhaps do, yeah, I did that for that one. I just kind of did, pretty much underpainted all of this in a grey. And really, if some of this paint was peeping through, that would be fine. It's actually a reasonably strong colour. So let that dry, and then when I come to paint the waves themselves, they could go over the top. I'll just do a tiny bit of that, just to give you a hint. So just change to a different brush. So it's pretty light, but I don't want it absolutely bright white, because sometimes there'll be a tiniest bit, there'll be a little bit of variation, let's say. So ideally this would be better when it's dry, but I can get a little bit of, again, just using a flat brush. This one's slightly smaller, and then just kind of making some marks across like that. Most of this I think I can do with a flat brush, but as I say, it probably would be easier to get those on once it's drying a little bit. Is that enough to go on with? Yep. Good. Right, so I'll carry that on next week. I'll probably do a little bit of watercolours as well next week, because somebody was asking about watercolours, so do a little bit of this and a bit. Yeah.
I've got this whiteboard. Do you think I should just put a different colour before?
You could do, or you could just, I mean this one was grey, actually this one was white.
I mean, if you want,
So if you're working with underpainting, it doesn't matter too much.
it's all like, it's a good picture.
Which medium are you using?
What's good in a photo, like,
Yeah, so if it's acrylics, you can very quickly just get a little bit of rough colours everywhere, and that would be like, that would be right, yeah.
anywhere near as good as photo. Zero.